House of Bad Memories is for fans of dialogue heavy fiction that like books that change genre partway through and then again towards the end. If you like Tarantino style tangents, then this is for you. If you like WTF moments, then this is for you. If you like reading about repressed childhood trauma, and maybe you do, then this is for you. Denny wants to be the world's best dad to his baby daughter, but things get messy when he starts hallucinating his estranged, abusive stepfather, Frank. Then Frank winds up dead, and Denny is held hostage by his junkie half sister, who demands he uncovers the cause of her father's death. Will Denny defeat his demons or be perpetually tortured for refusing to answer impossible questions? House of Bad Memories is Funny Games meets This Is England with a Rosemary's Baby undertaste. Available from Cemetery Gates Media, Friday, 13th of October.
Where we left off last time was I just asked you about what personal stuff went into the book, and
Yeah,
we we got near it, but we didn't get into it. So I
yeah,
feel like that
yeah.
was kind of the promise of what we were going to jump off on. I think, though, first for anybody who's listening or watching, just a little context. We got right to the just the meaty part of the conversation that has to do specifically with the book, and we had to end for the day. And so it was like a little cliffhanger of the way our conversation goes. And in between then and now, I've read like 3 books and recorded 2 different interviews, and I know that you've been pretty busy too. So, um, uh, yeah, it's we're jumping back in, and I think for the sake of time and everything, yeah, why don't we just get right into it? Whatever, however you feel like you want to approach that question, let's just do it.
Yeah. Well, hello and welcome back to all of you. Thank you for tuning in again to part 2 of the Arc Party with Rob Olson. I am the guest, Michael David Wilson, the author of books including The Girl in the Video and They're Watching, the founder of This Is Horror. I'm forthcoming from Cemetery Gates Media on Friday the 13th of October. You can pre-order it now. It's House of Bad Memories. And before, in part 1, you wanted to ask me about what were some of the most autobiographical elements of the book. And so, as I said previously, this was very much a book of 2 halves. So, I initially wrote the first half as a novella. It was, going to be published, but then for like a few very minor reasons that didn't happen. I decided to withdraw. No problem with that publisher at all. We just didn't kind of align. And then when I got it back, I was in a very different place to when I'd written the original novella. So the first half, I guess I was unpacking some childhood trauma that I had had, and I was kind of navigating and working through the relationship that I had with my father. And I mean, it was tumultuous at times, so I took some of that as I guess like inspiration for the first half of the novel. But it it's really interesting to be talking about this now because actually I held on to a lot of, I guess, anger and injustice and just negative feelings towards some aspects of my childhood. And so I was dealing with that in the moment while writing it. But actually, now, any kind of feelings of animosity or negativeness, I don't have anymore.
Oh
It's
wow,
gone. And
wow.
I'll explain a little bit about that as well. Now, I want to say, particularly if my parents stumble upon this interview for some bizarre reason, my dad was never quite the level of Frank. This is fiction. So I have embellished and gone way over the top. There are little things that are autobiographical, but people can just guess what is and what isn't. At this point, I don't feel like I need to say what did or didn't happen. But when I was writing it, I mean, I was holding on to a lot of anger, and I mean, at the time, I'd just become a new father as well, so a lot of that and the feelings that Denny has towards May and wanting to protect his daughter, like a lot of that is coming from the heart. And I know that Jack Ketchum Dallas Mayer, he spoke about writing from the wound, and I really think with House of Bad Memories, that is exactly what I did. But as with my general approach to life and to trauma, it's interspersed with a lot of humor. Like, even
Yeah.
though I've been through some things both in the past few years and in my life generally, it's very difficult for me to tell somebody a real life story of bad things happening without me cracking a few jokes. I guess because I just don't want it sounds ridiculous, but I don't want to put a downer on things, even if what I'm talking about is understandably a thing where if you were to put a downer on something, that would be it. But I guess I'd rather laugh than cry, although I do understand that sometimes it's important to cry too. You need to let that out. So I have had moments like that. But the second half of the book, that was written after my separation from my ex-wife. So we're now divorced, but so it's bizarre that I wrote one half when I was processing some things from my childhood, and then I wrote the other half when I was processing the biggest, I guess, traumatic incident of my adulthood. So there's a lot of personal trauma baked into this book. Now, I said that all the negative feelings that I had towards my father, and look, like any feelings that I had were very complicated anyway, because I don't want this to turn into like, I'm just like shitting all over my father. Although if you've read chapter 22, you might wonder in which way. Not literally, but metaphorically. Like that there are certainly good aspects, a lot of good aspects about him as a dad, but I think at times during my childhood, the negative stuff kind of outweighed that. But now that's forgiven. That's in the past, and that's why it was like, man, how am I going to talk about this? And I'm not even
Yeah.
in the space that I was in when I was writing it. So I don't think I could write House of Bad Memories today in the way that I wrote it when I wrote it, because I'm just not in the mindset. One of the big reasons that actually I just completely forgave, what had happened and said this is over, this is in the past, was because the trauma surrounding things that happened with my breakup and subsequent things almost put things into perspective, and I could see that, like, both my parents have been and continue to be so supportive and to have shown me so much love during this really difficult time. And I think as well, like I've said before on this is horror podcast and maybe in conversations with you too, but if we think about kind of the criminal justice system and things like that, wouldn't it be awful to be known for the absolute worst thing that you've done and that defines you? And then that it doesn't matter if you're sorry, it doesn't matter if you're a good person now, you're just always known for that. And I I felt that, like, you know, I, even though, like, my dad isn't known for that because I haven't publicly been going around like talking shit about him, but I just thought, even in, like, in my mind, it had built up to almost be like, this is what defines him. I'm holding on to hatred, and I don't want to hold on to hatred. And I realized I had the power to stop holding on. I could let go. And I also realized that my own happiness should not be contingent on the actions of another person. And one thing was, I was holding on and I was waiting for an explicit apology, for an over acknowledgement of what had happened. And then if I do that, then my happiness is contingent on the action of another person. And that is not a good
Yeah.
place to be. And, it was obvious as well that my dad was sorry for some of the things that happened in my childhood, but his personality and way of being is that you're just not going to get that explicitly. So that's that. um Now my mother has explicitly apologized for some of my childhood, and I've just said, it's okay, don't hold on to that. I forgive you, I love you. And so
Yeah.
sometimes periodically she'll apologize again, and it's like, what? It's done. It's done. So I just think anytime you have like a moment of trauma or conflict, or something happens, then it gives you an opportunity to almost evaluate everything else that is going on in your life. And so the divorce, the separation, the custody battle, the being apart from my daughter, it really put everything else into perspective. And I mean, some of the good things that have happened as a result of this, and that might not be the sentence people were expecting, but one is it's going to be really, really difficult for me to have a grudge with anyone, because the bar as to what you would have to do has been set high. And I mean, also, it just made me realize, if there's nothing happening now and I'm holding on to something from the past, it's like I don't even have the capacity to do that. So yeah, I don't hate anyone. Um, I don't have, obviously, the feelings with my kind of current situation and my ex are complicated, but at the moment, we're both seeing my daughter. We're doing our best to make things work, and I certainly do not hold on to hatred towards my ex either. It's like what's happened has happened. We can't change anything. Let's just move forward, and that's what I'm trying to do. In any action, in every action, I'm trying to lead with love and with kindness, but it can be difficult, but that's what I'm trying to do. And I'm trying to do it not just for me, but for my daughter and for anyone, I guess, who interacts with me. It's going to be a better place if I'm leading with love. So I think that that gets into, I guess, the core of the question.
So I have like several ways I could go with this, but I think one of the kind of main things that I'm pulling out of that. First of all, thanks for sharing. Like I know that anytime we're sharing things that are personal or talking about hard things from our past, it's can't be easy. But um, so I appreciate you being willing to talk about it. And especially the way that it comes out in the book with Frank, the father figure, and how you've been talking about what personal things tie in. There is kind of a feeling of your problems can transcend the grave in a way. So, a personal experience for me, my father was never really a part of my life. Like before I was 2 years old, my parents divorced, and he moved to Alaska. So he lived thousands of miles away from me, and I barely ever saw him. Um, and you would think, oh, he was never in your life. That's easy. But for some reason, I can't let go of like the disappointment of him not being around and him leaving and all these things. And so even though he's been gone, it'll be like 22 years or something now. Like it's still something that I have a hard time forgiving or letting go of because there's disappointment and I can't get over like you disappointed your child or your children.
Yeah,
Um, and so like there was kind of that in the book, Frank becomes kind of a specter that is haunting the story, whether it's
yeah,
literal or just Denny having to deal with thinking about all the things that happened. Um, those kinds of problems can haunt you. And what's great is it sounds like you found a way to exercise that ghost a little bit through writing the
yeah,
story. But I think that it does resonate for people who have grudges like this, and we've all had hard problems with someone in our life. So I feel like that's a really relatable part of the story.
yeah. I mean, to talk completely directly, if my father had passed away in 2018 when I was first writing this, then I think I would have been haunted by all the negativity forever. And that was kind of
Yeah.
like where my mindset was at initially writing it and writing the first half. Um, but but now, I mean, if he were to pass away today, I hope he doesn't, and that would be quite a scary timing. But that there wouldn't be animosity or hatred, and I mean, I could talk at his funeral, and I could give a good speech, and I could give a kind speech, and we have a scene in House of Bad Memories where there's the possibility of Denny having to talk at his father's funeral, and it was difficult for him to do with authenticity if it were to also be, a kind speech. So I'm glad that I'm not in that place. I guess what makes it so difficult talking about things like this is I don't want, the kind of things that I'm saying here to get back to my dad, to get back to my ex, and then for there to be some misconception that I'm holding on to some hate or negativity to either of them. because I'm not. But that is the biggest fear about talking about these things. I mean, it
Right.
can be a fear for a lot of people, I suppose, in any sort of media, having a soundbite or having something they said took out of
Yeah.
context, or even put in context but without the intentionality, without like understanding the full kind of meaning. So I mean, yeah, how's that for explicit? I don't have an issue. I don't hold on to hate or negativity for either of them. I don't think I can be any more unambiguous than that.
So the way that the story, the way that House of Bad Memories plays out, here's what I picked up. This was a person who he had to confront a bad thing he went through, but then he also had to deal with the fact that it seemed like certain people remembered it differently or didn't realize how hard it was for him to go through. And so, like, in addition to looking at all these old skeletons and just remembering the bad stuff, he then had to like confront the fact that my sister didn't realize how hard it was for me, or my, like that type of a thing. And so, yeah, it's not as much of like it's not a hit piece on anything. It's like and I think that's what's identifiable with it, is that we've all had something that it was really hard to get through, and sometimes we don't want to think about it, but when we're confronted with it, history is can be different from different perspectives. So um my memory of my father is way different than my mother's or my brother's.
Mm,
And so hearing them say nice things about him, I'm like, are we talking about the same person?
yeah.
So I really kind of identified with that part of the book too, like confronting not only the bad history, but then the other versions of the history that maybe you didn't think existed.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, because people change and evolve throughout their lives, sometimes regress, unfortunately, as well as evolve. If there's like a reasonable age gap between siblings, then you can get a pretty different interpretation of someone.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you have a different lived experience or whatever. Yeah.
Right,
Um,
right. And I mean, even being the oldest child as opposed to the youngest child, it's going to be a much different experience because, unfortunately, for the oldest child, which I am, it's almost like, well, this is the test run. This is the first time, and you're gonna hone your parenting, I suppose, after because you're just doing it out of the gate. Whereas when you get to the youngest child, I mean, you got some miles in terms of parenting. So you know the things that worked, you know the things that didn't. I mean, it's the same. It's the same with podcasting. Not that I'm saying podcasting and parenting are pretty much the same thing, but you listen to our first interviews compared to our latest interviews, and one would hope that we've got kind of significantly better, that we're improving all the time.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. And to that point, that was another thing that I wanted to call out about the story. So Denny's got like his family has recently changed in as much as he's got a young child, and so now he's a father.
Mm,
And since this story deals with fatherhood a lot, you're seeing almost his, what I'm interpreting as his kind of overcorrection for maybe the parenting that he received.
mm,
And it made me think about, so I'm not a parent, but my current relationship, she's got two kids, and when those kids have something going on, whether it's a play they're in or like a soccer game or whatever, I will always be there, because for me it's very important to be present in a kid's life, and it's because of like my experience of not having that I feel like I don't want to ever let someone down and not be there for them. So was there Was that kind of how we built it in? Because at the beginning, especially, Denny's almost kind of obsessively focused on May and taking care of the baby and being with the baby as much as possible.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and there's quite a lot of autobiography that went into that, and like, yeah, it's impossible to for me to talk about this book without sharing, without being really personal and honest. But my perception was that throughout my family, particularly on one side, that there'd been like a cycle of fathers that hadn't been great. Let's just put it like that, to put it in very mild terms. And so I decided, and I tried to make a promise to say that I was going to break that cycle, because in a way you could turn this into a completely supernatural thing. It's almost like a curse. It's like,
Yeah, yeah,
you become a father, and then, I mean, you're going to mess up. I mean, all parents unfortunately do mess up, but there are limits, and we can say, like, right, these actions I won't do. These are things I won't do. So, I mean, I said there were certain things that I would never do to my child or to my children. And I said, I'm breaking the cycle. That's not going to happen. Like, I'm not going to ever, like, physically discipline my children. I'm very against that. And so I made that promise, and I feel that I've broken the cycle. But and yeah, like, I was, and I am very protective of my daughter. I mean, it's harder now because she doesn't live with me. So there's only a limit to what
yeah,
can be done, and also the way that things have unfolded. I'm not the main parent, so I can't make rules and decisions in that way. But I can make the decision to, every time I see her, treat her with love and kindness and respect. So I'm being mindful of the things that I can control. But I do, and this is completely going off the story now. This is just like sharing, but
yeah.
I do have complicated feelings, because on one hand, I've broken the cycle, but I don't feel good about the fact that, I had a child with someone, and now we're not together anymore. I feel bad about that. I feel like I let her down in some way, and obviously, like, with the divorce and the custody battle being complicated, I feel like, have I inadvertently not broken her cycle, and I've just messed her up in a completely different way? And I didn't mean to do that. And I battle with that. It's really difficult for me. Um, but people tell me, that I haven't. But sometimes I feel like I'm letting her down in different ways. And it's really fucking hard.
Do you want a minute, or do you want to push through?
We're live. We're live,
Yeah, all
baby.
right. All right, that's cool. I just want to make sure,
Chapter
like,
22.
uh,
Chapter 22. No.
yeah, no. um, here's what I'll say as from the experience of a child. Um, you never know what's gonna being a child and looking at the parents I have, I don't think they knew what was going to be good or bad. They were just doing their best, right? And I think that, well, one was doing their best. Um, One made a decision to not be there, but that was you don't know what there's not like a rule book. You do your best, and from my mother, who was the person who was kind of primary in my life, I lionize that woman, and I do see all the effort that she made. And even my father, in the time I was with him, I could tell like that dude was into being a dad. He just
Yeah.
really made bad choices, and so it didn't work out. But like, you can always see the good efforts and you can see the love, you can see the effort. But I think as parents, all you can do is try your best and make sure that they know how you feel about them. I think that's really all you can do. But again, that's me not being a parent. That's me not going through the kind of heart killing things that a parent has to go through on a daily basis. So yeah, I don't know. But from my experience, we are just trying to figure it out, and we're just doing what we think is best. I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was helpful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree. I'm just not sure what to add to it.
Yeah. So, not necessarily pulling away from that super serious stuff, but kind of zooming out a
I
little
mean,
bit.
we certainly can. We certainly can. It's not like,
Well,
no, please, let's continue with this. Make me cry again. Let's go for two. I mean, I think one episode Brian Keane on This Is Horror cried 3 times, so you've got about another 50 minutes to get another two in.
oh god, I am not the interviewer that you are, my friend. So I don't see myself rising to that challenge. But
I oh, not nice. I don't know if deliberate pun about Brian Keane's The Rising book,
oh,
but yeah, I don't know if it's a badge of honor really to be like, oh, I can make people I interview cry. It's like, why do we want to go on your show then? What the fuck?
right.
That doesn't sound like a good
Well,
time.
you connect with people in a way that I feel like I shy away from. So I feel like when you interview people, you open doors that I'm a little worried to open. So I've always thought that's something I could work on. And actually, honestly, so like we're gonna just turn it to something that happened recently. So since starting this podcast, I think I think I've just broke 20 episodes of this new thing that's just me. And when I was talking to Josh Mallerman, we got into some cool stuff, and then we stopped recording. And I told him a really like vulnerable story about like when I was going through chemotherapy and how like what my lowest moment was. And it felt
Mm,
really good to talk about it, but we weren't recording. But when I was just
yeah,
talking with Nat Cassidy about nestlings, there's a lot of like personal suffering and stuff that goes on in that book, and it opened a door for me to like feel like I can talk about this because it kind of relates to the conversation. And I did open up when I told that story. So on a future episode of the podcast, like I think that what I'm starting to be more vulnerable about my feelings and the stuff that's been hard for me. So, and that's absolutely a inspiration from when you had like, some more of your vulnerable moments. Recently talking about, the stuff you were just talking about with your,
mm,
separation and the custody and stuff. But so like, I think I'm kind of starting to want to be more of that as well, especially if it ties into the story. If it's like I'm interviewing James Patterson or something, I wouldn't be like, let me tell you about chemotherapy. But when it serves the discussion, I feel like it is a great thing to get really personal, because then we're really kind of connecting in a way and not keeping it just surface level. So yeah, that's really actually like a big inspiration for me to try and be more of that person, because I'm really guarded usually. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we may have touched on it in episode 500 of This Is Horror podcast, which, for people who don't know, Rob Olson was interviewing me alongside Lisa Quigley, Ladies of the Fright. And, the I think the turning point for being more vulnerable on This Is Horror was episode 100 with David Moody, which we actually did live as well. So, when you're doing it live, it's like, well, this is it. This is the episode. And like David started talking about mental health and depression and just the real kind of struggles that he'd been facing, particularly going back to being a full-time writer, and he didn't realize how isolating and lonely it would be and the kind of negative effect that would have on his mental health. And then when we did that, we started getting comments and feedback from people thanking us for just being so candid and vulnerable and open. And I I guess that was the shift. And beforehand, it's like, oh, if something is going to be uncomfortable or contentious, I don't want to get into that. So I would be guarded. But after that, it's like, no, if there's ever an opportunity, then I will, if that's naturally where the conversation is going. So, to be clear, it's like I'm not deliberately looking for trauma or wounds to open, but if there's an uncomfortable question that seems to be appropriate to what we're talking about, then I will do it. And I will do that with anyone, and that would include James Pattinson. I mean, you know, we had we've had Dean Koontz on a couple of times. I started pretty near the beginning of the interview asking him about, having an abusive alcoholic father. That's
right,
quite a
right,
bold move, I suppose. you know, Arguably the the biggest guest in terms of reach that has been on the show. He's 10 minutes in and he's talking about, these really personal moments from his childhood, the difficult relationship, but it completely was appropriate to the conversation, especially as I open with early life lessons.
right,
Again, literally the last This Is Horror podcast that I recorded, it may be out by the time this airs, because it will probably be the next episode of This Is Horror. We were speaking to Daniel Kraus, and I directly asked him, what is your relationship like with your father? And his response was like, wow, I respect how bold you've been to just ask it. And that is the way I asked it. There was no real
yeah,
run up to it. But if you've read Whale Fall, and if you haven't, it's not a spoiler to anyone anyway. I know you've read it because you've spoken to Daniel,
yeah,
but it's so much of it is about relationships, parental relationships. And so it completely served the conversation. I mean, there's there's trauma, there's a kind of, it's not a spoiler because literally the main character finds out that his father has committed suicide within the first page, I believe it is. So it's
right.
about processing their tumultuous relationship. So in fact, thematically, there's some crossover between House of Bad Memories and Whalefall.
Oh yeah,
Aesthetically, and in the way that it's done, you probably couldn't get tonally much different books. But in terms of the themes and yeah, there's crossover
yeah,
there.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, definitely for sure. I had a thought about the idea of how we are vulnerable when we're talking, and then going back to what you were saying about worrying, how people we're talking about might feel hearing it. And I was talking to Josh Malerman about the nonfiction book that he was in the process of writing when I talked to him, but he's since finished. And to me, the thought was, wow, that's put down on paper. Like, those are your thoughts that are going to carry on forever. What if, like, down the road, you have to explain yourself? But then I thought about, there was Malcolm Gladwell made an appearance on some podcast and was saying how, yeah, of course I disagree with some of the stuff that's in, my early books, because I'm a different person now. I've changed. And so I think that being kind of authentic in the moment and talking about what XYZ means to me now is okay, because as long as people are giving you the benefit of the doubt, they have to understand that, like, we are constantly evolving people. And, if I don't say something clearly or use the right words, what's the meaning behind them? What is the feeling behind them? Hopefully, you would give me the benefit of the doubt to do that. But then otherwise, give me the benefit of the doubt to evolve my thoughts and feelings too over time. So, but just not
Yeah.
saying them at all, I think, is one of the most, like, dangerous things you could do, is, like, just never express yourself.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's important to have an outlet to express yourself and your most personal feelings. It certainly doesn't always need to be, and perhaps shouldn't be, public, particularly because, as we've said, like, that could come back at you. And, what you're thinking initially about a thing, even within a few hours, it might change. But I do
Yeah.
think it's very dangerous. And, I can say from firsthand experience, if you hold on to things and you never tell anyone, you should talk to someone. You should have, like, a trusted group. Of course, there's going to be, like, different people to talk about different things. It could be like, right, this is my friendship conflict friend, this is my relationships, this is my childhood trauma friend. Hopefully you don't identify your friends in terms of the trauma that you can talk to them about. But yeah, I think,
Right.
much as our lives have different seasons, we have different people who we talk to about different things, and we go to be vulnerable about different things. It's probably good to not have one person who you go to about everything, because that's quite the burden to put upon that person.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Especially if it's like your partner. Um,
Yeah.
like, that could be poisoning a relationship, where it's like you need to have healthy relationships with a lot of, not a lot, but, like, more than just a person, because you could be poisoning that relationship by just dumping everything on them. Um, I'm going to switch gears,
Yeah.
buddy, because I want to, for the sake of time, I want to talk about other aspects of the book than maybe, like, the real heavy stuff. And we talked a little bit about it in the other episode, but there are definitely, like, more moments of levity and stuff throughout the book, and
Oh
that just
yeah.
feels like that was kind of like your natural way of telling a story. But the question I'm going to ask is, what was, like, your favorite aspect of the book to write?
My favorite aspect to write, I think, a lot of the interaction between Jade and Gaza. Anything involving Jade was immensely fun to write. I also really enjoyed writing. There's a part in the book towards the end that references Annabelle Chong, and I'm not going to say any more than that. But that was a very fun part to write. Like I like the humor and the light parts. Those are generally the most enjoyable parts for me to write. I mean, the the book that I recently completed, Daddy's Boy, is even heavier on the humor. It might be a little bit much for some people, but in a way, I wrote that book for me because I've been dealing with so many heavy things. I just needed to write something which, in many ways, was just pretty fucking dumb. Just something fun for me to do,
Yeah.
something enjoyable. It's like, this one is for me. Now, despite that there are actually heavy themes if you go deeper and to do with fathers and sons and parental relationships. So that obviously House of Bad Memories has not kind of exorcised that completely, but actually Daddy's Boy is more dealing with the idea of like abandonment and having a child but not always being with them, or not being with them for
Ooh.
a very long time. But we can save that for the release of Daddy's Boy if
I was
you'll
gonna say
even
I've
talk to me having read it.
sounds like that's up my alley a bit. So for listeners, the Jade character is Denny's sister, who's kind of a junkie, and I guess the way that I would characterize her is she's kind of a fuck up, but like in a really entertaining way. Like she's just blustery and larger than life, and swears like
Yeah,
a sailor, and makes bad choices, but like in her own weird way, like because of the life that she's in, has like a weird competency that becomes valuable in like the fucked up situation that the story like ends up
yeah,
being. And then and then oh, I didn't have, it's Gaza, right? The
Gaza.
Yeah,
Yeah,
is like the her kind of like her baby daddy, who is equally if not more fucked up. And but like the way he shows up is very much not, I don't want to say comic relief, but like it's obvious that
yeah,
this character's presence um makes for the ability for like weird foolishness and tomfoolery to happen. And so it's very entertaining, especially when the two of them interact, because it's just like kind of a clown show of like fucked up lives, um but not in a one-dimensional way. Like they don't seem like they're caricatures, like they seem like real
mm,
people. But just, yeah, they do open the door to more of that levity and stuff like that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think, Jade is a complicated character, and Jade is someone with a lot of loyalty and a lot of love. It just can be difficult sometimes to make the right decisions, but any decision she makes is the decision that feels right to her at the time. But she's very
Yeah.
impulsive. She will do
Yeah.
exactly what she thinks needs to be done at that moment. She will say whatever turns up in her mind. She doesn't give a fuck. If she ever gave a fuck, she is all out of fucks to give now. And yeah, I really like Jade, and the early reader reaction. I mean, for a number of people, she's their favorite character. And it's kind of got the gears turning that if ever I were to write a sequel, could I write, or a spin off even, would I would I dare to write a book where Jade is the main character? And I might do that, but yeah, it would take something.
Well, even like the thing that as a reader I think of first is Jade is introduced to us as this kind of like larger than life thing that she is, and we are
Mm.
endeared to her even though she's got flaws. But as a reader, my first thought is like, what got her to this point? Like, how is she this? So, like, my thoughts are an origin story. Like, is there a novella
Yeah.
that takes
Yeah.
us to her younger life, and like,
Mm.
and then basically puts it in a situation where it's like, oh, it all makes sense now. Of course, that's how she acts because of this thing that I now know.
Yeah. All right.
But
So we've gone from sequel to prequel, or we can do the whole thing which a number of authors have done, where a book is simultaneously a prequel and a sequel, jumping
yeah,
between time periods. But yeah, there's a lot to think about. I mean, I already have a lot of story ideas and more story ideas and more stories in progress than I have time, but it's the way that the brain works. It just brings more of them, more of them to me. So,
do you know the person I love doing this with is Josh Mallerman? Because even if I know it's never going to happen, like if you plant an idea for a good story in his head, like his enthusiasm for it is fucking great. Even if it's like, it's never going to happen, but like in the moment he's like, I could write that book, and it's very exciting. So I love
yeah.
doing that kind of thing with Josh, where it's like, what would happen to the census taker, or like, that kind of thing. So, um,
Mm,
but
yeah.
uh,
Maybe we can have a Harry the Landlord origin story.
um,
That would be
it was like the
quite
worst
out
time for
of
me to
left
take a sip.
field. Yeah.
So, I've been starting to ask this question, and I might actually kind of make this a common thing. Um,
Mm.
outside of like obviously being entertained and enjoying the story, I didn't ask this question already, did I? In the last one, it's been a while, but
Well,
if I did,
you haven't
I
asked
haven't
it
asked
yet, so I don't know
it.
what the question is going to be.
So outside of just like the entertainment factor of reading a story and enjoying it, like, is there something that you would like to hear that people came away from this book feeling, or like a deeper meaning that you would like them to kind of discover as part of this book in a non-spoiler kind of way you could talk about?
Like, I think that any interpretation and any feelings that anyone has coming away from this or any other story are completely valid. And we've said before that, I mean, the moment that the writer puts the book into the world, they've let go of it now. In a way, it's not theirs, it's the reader's. So I wouldn't be so prescriptive, borderline pretentious to be like, oh, I want you to go away with this feeling or this thought or this epiphany. And because I don't know what life experiences you're bringing to the story, but of course, I want people to be entertained, as you mentioned before. I would hope that people would laugh at some of the humorous moments. But if it helps you with anything, if it helps you unpack some of your childhood trauma, if it makes you think about a relationship in a different way, then that's incredible for me. Yeah, I mean, if it can affect your life in any positive way, then that is a good thing. But I don't want to be prescriptive as to say this or that. And we find with books that they can help people and they can affect people in ways that they didn't even know they needed that help. But even some people, they can be a little bit disparaging to books that only entertain. But I think I think that a book that entertains you, I mean, that's an amazing thing to be able to do, especially
Yeah.
if, you know, maybe you're going through some things, maybe you're having some depressive episodes or worse, and then being entertained and distracted, having these moments of levity and joy, being able to laugh. How is that less valid than it making you have an epiphany about your life? I mean, it's incredible. It's entertaining, may have taken your state from being depressed to being happy in a moment. So I think
Hmm.
any reaction is completely valid. Any positive epiphany, reaction, response is great for me to hear. And any negative, then I'm sorry for inadvertently causing you discomfort, unless it was valid and helped you reach a higher point. And if you didn't enjoy the book, then I'm sorry and it wasn't for you. But there are many other great writers that might be for you that are completely different to me, like Daniel Kraus, who we mentioned. So check out his work.
Um, you brought up, and the one of the reasons I asked that question is exactly kind of what you got around to, which is that just having an entertaining story is absolutely great. And the trouble that I've found myself in as a person who talks about books is I have to craft a conversation about a book, and if it's just entertaining, I feel like I can have a conversation about that book, but like when it explores deeper themes, I feel like it's easier to kind of go into stuff. And so as a I started to worry that as a person who talks about books, then other people are going to listen to those conversations, that I don't want to give a book that is purely for the sake of entertainment different treatment than a book that also explores, other stuff in addition to being entertaining. And so I'm really careful now to not make it seem like one is better than the other, because at the end of the day, everything that we talk about is like the most subjective shit ever. Like, um we we're not like the arbiters of taste, we're just talking about shit that we liked and why we liked it. And I don't want to ascribe more value to one thing than another, so I'm now very careful about not saying, hey, why is this important, but instead of saying, like, exploring more kind of evenly those types of things. So I know I kind of stumbled around what I just said there, but like the general idea being like the book you wrote is the book you wrote, and that's why it's good, or that's why it's important. um and I feel like that's kind of a message I'm trying to get out now more is, you know it
Mm,
doesn't necessarily have to mean more than just being a fun ride. And like you said, um sometimes we need that, man. Like we just need a moment away from the dark thoughts or whatever it is to kind of reset or feel good or have an excuse to laugh. And that can be more important than reading a book that explores, you know, deeper thoughts sometimes too.
right. Sometimes I just want to laugh and watch a Tim and Eric skit. Other times I maybe want to watch a David Lynch film and really unpack exactly what is going on here and dissect the meanings. But I don't think that one is necessarily more valid than the other. I think it's a different function. If I watch Blue Velvet or Freddy Got Fingered, I'm going to have a completely different experience. But I think that they both serve a function for a different time and a different response that I need. And I think too that, I mean, a lot of books or films that are just entertainment are actually not just entertainment. There are meanings,
Yeah.
there are things that are going into them. They might just not be as overt. I mean, The Greasy Strangler, which was written by Toby Harvard. We had a conversation with him, and on the surface, you might just think, that this is this wild comedy with a lot of dumb one-liners and body comedy, and it's just there to make you laugh. But actually, if you dig deeper, this is about a father-son relationship. This is about that dynamic. This is about navigating adulthood and relationships and sex. It's just couched in this very fucking laugh out loud hilarious movie. So
Yeah.
I don't think that many things are just entertainment. There are other layers, there are other meanings if you want to look for them, just because it's not so explicit as Whalefall, which I keep coming back to, as if, like, with my conversation with Daniel, he slipped me some money and he was like, "So you're doing this House of Bad Memories tour, but can you just, if I PayPal you this, could you mention Whalefall every interview?" No, that didn't happen. But yeah, it's very obvious, the themes in pretty much every page, but then just because House of Rot by Danger Slater, it might be less apparent, it doesn't mean that it's not there to be uncovered.
Yeah. Um, yeah. And the my joking thought about Whalefall, which isn't a joking thought, but um, like I never expected to have such empathy for a whale that swallowed a protagonist as I did reading that book. So like at some point you just fucking love the whale in a way,
Yeah,
and I was not expecting that. So but
yeah,
in
yeah.
all seriousness, because that book has been mentioned several times, go back and listen to my interview with Daniel Kraus, which, by the way, he tweeted it was one of the best interviews he's ever had or something. And so, like, that's going in promotional material for me somewhere because that's high fucking honors. But yeah, it's such a, and then I can't wait to hear you talk to him too because it's such an interesting fucking book, and it just the way that he kind of explains how he crafted it and everything. Yeah, but on its face, it's a fucking great book. And the moment I saw that most chapters start with like a PSI rating of how much air is left in the tank,
Mm,
immediately made me feel claustrophobic and scared and like worried. Like all he did was put some numbers on a page and it just amped up my anxiety in a way. And I was like, God damn it, that's good.
yeah.
God damn it, that's good. um, anyway, this isn't the whale fall episode. Um, kind of going back to. Sorry, I'm going to cut that because an email popped up on my iPad and it
Okay.
distracted me. It's my McSweeney's Halloween episode issue that was edited by Brian Evanson. It's like the
Right.
shipping notification. So, um, sorry,
Good.
look, I will cut that. But anyway, um,
You can keep it in if people, maybe people want to know.
I'm excited about. Oh man, Brian Evanson. But
You
anyway,
should be.
have you had
Yeah,
the opportunity?
yeah,
Yeah, you've talked to him at least once, if not more than
yeah.
once,
We
right?
we spoke to. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love Brian Evanson. I think he's one of the best writers in the world. Um, him and
And the
Nathan
sweetest
Ballingrud,
guy.
for just in my mind, like I'd put Brian Evanson and Nathan Ballingrud as a kind of pairing. They just seem
Yeah,
to go well together.
which I think is this. I think that's Visible Filth
Yeah, yeah.
right
This
there, isn't
wasn't
it?
deliberately a moment
Yeah,
to plug a book that we
yeah,
put out, but even if it was, there's no financial gain for me at this point anyway. It's out of print with This Is Horror, but you can get it
right.
in his collection, like, which I think is called Wounds. I mean, the story is called Wounds. I think the collection maybe.
It is. I just saw him
Yeah.
tweet something about it being re-released again under a different title, maybe with different
Oh,
stories. But Since we're kind of in this realm, do you want to take a minute to talk about for anybody who, for some reason, doesn't know what This Is Horror is, kind of like what you do, or some of the recent episodes that you've made, or anything like that? You want to do a little introduction to people?
Yeah, well, This Is Horror podcast has been going on for over a decade now. And if you include some of the kind of sub episodes, I believe as of yesterday, it has 541 episodes. I believe the book
Oh,
had 540. So I'm
oh,
revealing that at this
setting
moment.
that
Rob's going to
true.
walk out.
Oh, wow.
I'll, I'll,
Applause,
I'll,
applause.
I'll,
That's fucking phenomenal.
I'll be honest because, you know, booked and This Is Horror were going for such a long time. I was waiting for the day when we hopefully, unless something happened to me and or Bob, where we would finally, overtake booked for numbers of episodes. But with the Arc Party, you've still got some
No,
mileage on
take
me.
that
Is that
win.
right? I don't know. Take
Take
that
the win,
win.
man. You
Okay.
deserve it.
But but anyway, I was meant to be telling you wonderful people about This Is Horror, but instead it just turned into some one-upmanship apropos of nothing. Rob wasn't in any way trying to belittle me, but that's obviously the horrible, nasty person that I am. But yeah, This Is Horror podcast. We interview people every week. We often put out 2 episodes a week. And we've spoken to the likes of Dean Koontz and Chuck Palahniuk, Jennifer Lynch, Charlene Harris. I could keep listing people. It might not be that exciting for you, but if you have a favorite horror author or even horror tangential, there's a good chance that we've had a conversation with them. And if we haven't, then we're hopefully planning one. So in addition to talking about the book, we like to know about the author's life. So, often, particularly for the first time we speak to the author, the episode will typically be in 2 parts. The first part will be about early life lessons about their journey as a writer, about struggles and being vulnerable, as we mentioned before. Whereas the second will be a deeper dive into the book. But I'm not just interested in dissecting the book, but I want to know the person. I want the people who listen to come away having felt like they know the person a little bit better. So we do get very personal. We do talk about pain points. I think if you're a writer, then it's really valuable too, because I like to get writing lessons and craft lessons. So, I mean, this is incredibly grandiose, but in terms of like takeaways from the podcast, if you can listen to some episodes and you can improve as a writer and even better improve as a person, then the job has been done. But equally, if I just entertained you, then that was valid too.
And I will say that you guys do a fucking great job. So I'm going to start with that. So anybody who is interested, not just in horror writers, but just in hearing about interesting authors in general, and the books that they've got coming out, This Is Horror absolutely must be on your list. But specifically, what I've really done with Arc Party is just dialed into primarily a discussion about the specific book. And I've kind of
Mm,
cut out most of the other types of conversation. I stay really focused on talking about the book, and you do take the opportunity to explore deeper into the person and who they are, and you have a bigger kind of approach than what I do. I really dialed into the one thing, and you really go deeper and farther. So if that is something that as a listener you want. Like Michael gets great guests, ranging from, like, obviously you said, like Dean Koontz and Chuck Palahniuk and stuff, to people who are lesser known, who may be starting out or just don't have as much, attention as some of the big names. So um, it's just invaluable, man. And I don't think that you ever set out to be important in horror, but like the existence of This Is Horror as a podcast and as a website is absolutely a service to the horror community that can't be denied, and is a very valuable resource for people.
Well, thank you very much. And I mean, I think, the going into the personal stuff, that probably is our unique selling point. Because there are a podcast such as The Arc Party and Talking Scared, where you dive deep into the book. But I'm not sure that I really know of any podcasts within the horror genre that jump into the personal life quite in the way that we do. It's interesting because there's been other podcasters who have said to me they almost don't do that as much because they feel like This Is Horror has it covered. So that was kind of an interesting comment. I mean, I don't believe that in the sense that it's like, oh, don't touch this. This is our area. No, of course not. I think I've said before the thing that makes the podcast unique is you. So it does. So the market can't become oversaturated because as long as you're not a clone, then you're going to be a unique individual. So your voice is what makes it interesting. But I think that's why we dive deep into the personal life in This Is Horror, because that is an interest of mine. And I'm really interested in self improvement, becoming a better human, becoming a kinder human. Goodness, I I need to do that. I think I've improved over the years. I think there's a long way to go. It is a journey for me. But some of my favorite podcasts, like outside of horror, they're about self improvement. I love the Tim Ferriss show, which is always about kind of hacking and optimizing and getting better. I'm really enjoying Andrew Huberman's The Huberman Lab, which is talking about like health and different ways to optimize the human body. I'm, a great advocate for the paleo diet, and so I listen to a lot of podcasts along those lines. So I'm just interested in getting better. I'm interested in philosophy. I'm interested in the way that different people think. I'm interested in getting to understand and know people better. So all of that goes in to This Is Horror. I'm a very curious person, so I will perhaps ask some questions that other people wouldn't, and my mind might go to some places that were unexpected for what was said. I have and I do latch on to little bits in a writer's answer that seem innocuous, but that's the direction I want to take it. And in a way, sometimes in these 2 hour conversations, the latest book we might only talk about for 10 to 20 minutes because I've
Right.
spent all the rest of the time talking about these other things. But I hope that that serves the community, because if you want a deep dive, you can listen to the Arc Party and you can listen to Talking Scared. You can listen to She Wore Black. I hope it's She Wore Black. I keep
Yes.
forgetting, is it She Wears Black or She Wore Black? It's definitely not She Is Wearing Black, but you know, that that is a fantastic podcast as well. That's a really unique podcast because it really hones in on gothic horror. That is the kind of niche, if you like gothic horror and Shirley Jackson. kind of esque stories, then you should listen to that one. And the host, Agatha Andrews, is such a smart and perceptive person as well. So definitely check out those. But I think we're all complementing one another in that what we're doing is serving the whole community rather than competing.
I will say that I agree with that. Everybody's got a place in the kind of sphere of horror podcasting, and it's not like you're getting the same 8 questions and answers every time you listen to this, these different podcasts. Everybody's got kind of their own approach. So yeah, it is very complimentary, and you have the opportunity then to hear 3 or 4 different conversations with the same author about um their book, or their, like, with This Is Horror, their life. And it, I talked to Daniel Kraus months ago, but I can't wait to hear what he says to you, because you're going to ask questions that I didn't think to answer, and it's going to be better for me. So, like, I think that's kind of the landscape of horror podcasting right now, is very complimentary.
Yeah, and it's because we're having conversations and we are actively listening. And often, when I'm preparing for an interview, for a podcast conversation, I will listen to other interviews that the guest has had. Um, I don't want to repeat too much, but also I just want to get a sense of this person. Also, as I said, I latch on to things, so they might have given an answer with some innocuous detail that the host rightly didn't follow up on, but I want to follow up on it. But I think that podcasting is so important, and the art of the conversation is so important, because when I'm researching, if I listen to interviews that are often not a podcast, it's like a quick 10-minute interview on YouTube, or maybe shorter, or maybe it's taken from a news program, or maybe it's a festival, or sometimes it's an awkward 20-minute Zoom call. There are people that I see that, in my opinion, are not very good at interviewing, or at least are not very good at conversations. It feels like they have their list of questions, but they're not actively listening. They're
Yeah,
just going through the questions. And even worse, there will be people who they clearly haven't read the book. Or, I've seen on numerous occasions, people will be like, so you got a blurb from Stephen King. What was that like? What did it feel like? You're not asking about the
right.
book. But then, like, I mean, it's okay, I think, to mention the blurb from King once, but there are people who in 10 minutes they keep going back for it, like, oh, I just can't believe that you got a blurb from King. Yeah, well, I fucking did. Move on.
Yeah,
So i
right. Is
think
that the
i
whole
think
story?
what we're
Yeah.
doing yeah what we're doing is just so valuable. And I'm so glad that media and technology is working in such a way that we have evolved from the interview to the conversation, because I want to hear from the real person. I don't want some Q&A bullshit. And it serves a purpose, and that's good, I guess, if you're doing it for a quick column in a magazine. But I feel if you're doing that for an audio or a video format, then you're not using the format to its full potential. So
Yeah.
that's my way of saying, like, I'm glad that hopefully that old way is going out, and I think what we're doing is, oh, so valuable.
I agree. And now I'm inspired to, because this was part of the conversation, one thing I'm going to do in my post on Substack, which is how these episodes go out, is make sure that I include a list of horror podcasts that people should check out. So the ones that we have mentioned, and then also I'll try and piece together some other ones as well that maybe didn't get mentioned, but not for any negative reasons. Because yeah, it's definitely it's one of those things where, like, much like when you're reading, you want to find an author whose voice speaks to you. It's the same thing with podcasts. Like, some stuff you might. I got to tell you that there was a podcast that was super famous, the true crime one, and I can't remember what it was. It was a true crime. What, it doesn't matter.
You're not talking about.
Um,
Oh, okay, okay, yeah.
but I tried to listen to it because it had so much praise, and I just could not get past the woman's voice, and so I stopped. And, like, maybe it's a great podcast, but, like, I can't do it. So there's so many reasons that you will or will not latch onto a podcast. So we'll do our best to make sure that we provide. I'll make sure I provide you with a list of stuff that is recommended and has really good content on it.
Yeah, and the reasons that one might not like a podcast can be completely different, from person to person. So, I mean, in your case, you didn't like that person's voice. For other people, they might love her voice. So,
Yep.
yeah, that's why, I was even I even made a point of caveating that Q&A style does not work for me, rather than saying this
Yep.
is objectively bad. This is my opinion. This is what I want. But actually, there could be some people who are like, no, I want to know this information. I want it to be succinct, fast, question, answer, move on. I got shit to do. But for me, I want to sit down for 2 or 3 hours and let's go deep.
Yeah.
Let's dive deep,
Which.
like in Whaleful by Daniel Kraus, out now, wasn't paid any money.
Well, I feel like we did that. So this absolutely was a conversation in the style of This Is Horror, and I did that intentionally. Like, starting out our first conversation with life lessons and then talking about writing and everything, was to honor your style and, like, the benefits of your style. And we definitely went places that I haven't gone, I think, in any other interview that I've done before. And we've got more real. So, this was for people who are listening or watching who haven't checked out Michael's podcast, kind of a preview of how similar it could be to what he does. So, but all that said, House of Bad Memories, Friday, October 13th. And I promoted the wrong social medias on the last episode, so that's going to be updated. But I also promoted that there was an ebook and a paperback, but I did not mention audiobook. So do you have anything specific to say about that while we wrap up?
So the audiobook is going to be published via This Is Horror, so I have the rights to the audio. It is narrated by Aubrey Parsons, who has done such a fantastic job. He's almost done too good of a job with the accents that I do wonder if some American listeners that are not really acquainted with the Peaky Blinders might find it harder to follow. But I not being an American, I don't know what it sounds like to to Americans to hear some strong British accents. But he has done such a marvelous job. It's going to be out anywhere that you get audiobooks. So previously, I've just gone exclusively with Audible. This time, we're going wide. So you're going to be able to get it anywhere you can get audiobooks. So Google Play, Apple Books, of course, Audible. I believe Spotify are selling books now. many
Wow,
other
cool.
places that I don't go for books, so can't recall the name, but it is going to be out soon. We are down to the wire with that one. We really are. There's a lot of things that we don't have time to go into about the audiobook, but it has been a journey. There were offers that I got, there were contracts that I reviewed, there were contracts that were not good enough that I reviewed, and I went back and forth with my lawyer, and we just couldn't finalize something. So in the end, I thought, you know what, I'm going to find a fantastic narrator, which I have done, Aubrey Parsons, and I'm going to put it out via This Is Horror. So it will be out soon. Realistically, it will probably be the end of October. That is kind of my fault. I mean, I didn't anticipate all the things falling through that did, but it's not Aubrey's fault. Bloody hell, Aubrey has turned this around in record time. So check it out. I will be letting people know on the This Is Horror website, on social media, the This Is Horror newsletter. People will know when this is available, and I really can't wait for you to listen to it. So I think you're going to have a good time. I think if you've read the book, it will be interesting for you to also check out the audio book and just see what that kind of adds, because particularly if you're not well versed in Birmingham and London accents, then it's going to add a different twist to the story. So check it out. House of Bad Memories available on audio, in audiobook, narrated by Audrey Parsons. Not coming Friday the 13th of October, but coming pretty bloody close to that date.
Well, yeah, I think that one of the things I liked most about the book was how I felt so immersed in the locality of it. So I definitely want to check out the audiobook. So I'm really glad that you did that. Um, and dude, I count you as a very close friend, and I really appreciate the decade plus that we've known each other, and that I also get to read awesome stories from you. So thank you so much for all of this time that I've known you, and for bringing a fucking great fucking story for me to read. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And you know that the feelings are mutual. You know that I love you. You know that this friendship is cherished. And I'm so glad that we know each other. I'm so glad that you're doing what you're doing. And I'm so, so, so fucking glad that chemo was successful. Like, it broke my
Yeah.
fucking heart. Like I might start crying again. Could we make it too? Like,
Oh,
for you to have
dude.
had for you to have had cancer and to have had to endure that. Like, I'm so fucking sorry, but I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that we're both here for absolute decades, and this friendship, this crazy ride will continue. So I love you. Thank you so much, man.
Love you right back, brother. All right, I'm going to stop the recording.